Well, over the years, the influx of technology and investment in Nigeria's economy has spurred the rapid growth and development of the Nigerian startup ecosystem and created the need for a legal framework and regulatory oversight. In July 2022, the Nigerian Startup Bill, a laudable initiative by the presidency in conjunction with various players, professionals, practitioners, and policymakers in the tech startup space, was passed by the National Assembly. The bill aims to provide a clear and detailed framework for the regulation of the startup ecosystem, thereby creating an enabling environment for the growth, attraction, and protection of investments in tech startups. But what is the future of Nigeria's startup bill? Well, joining me live in the studio to look at this, he is a lawyer and a manager with PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, Mr. Emmanuel Akpeme. Thank you so much for your time. I was able to get that.
Yes,
Thank you. It's the first time on the show. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Tolu, for having me here.
Yes. I'm looking at this act, Startup Act. It's no more a bill, it's an act. From what we had with the PIA and all of the waits and waits, this didn't wait that long. Now, what's the overview? Let's do a review of what this really aims to achieve.
Thank you so much, Tolu. So, yes, the Nigerian Startup Act, right, as you mentioned, is now an act.
Yes.
Haven't been assented to by the president. I do say that it is an act that you can even cover within 1 hour because it has 10 parts and 48 sections.
Wow.
So over an hour, a business-minded person can just go through it and get a good grasp of what is in the act. And looking at the act, as I said, the 10 parts. Number one, the part one has to spoke about the objectives and the application of the act, and whilst part two talks about the establishment of a council called the National Council for Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurship. This is actually the council that will be in charge of administering the act. Then part three then goes to talk about the operational structure of this particular council, and that is where we now see the establishment of the secretariat, which will be headed by NITDA, that is the National Information Technology Development Agency.
Yeah.
Going to part 4 of the act, it spoke about startup labeling process. So it is just about the issuance of certificates for startups that qualify to enjoy the incentives and benefits that are contained in the act. And we then go to the Startup Investment Seed Fund, which you see in part 5. And thereafter, you see the establishment of different accelerators, hubs, innovation, technology development zones, and then we saw tax and fiscal incentives under part 7 of the act. So I say this is a whole big gamut of different provisions that will really support tech startup in Nigeria.
I see that there is this focus on the tech space, and of course, the opportunities that they provide cannot be overemphasized at this time, where everyone is getting techie and all of that. But let's talk about the incentives really that this act introduces.
Okay, so thank you, Tolu. So, and you just took it out, right? To my own mind, I'll sort of say even the title of the act that says the Nigerian Startup Act, to me, it feels as if it is misleading because generally, if you just say Startup Act, you think it is for all startups,
exactly.
Right? But it is actually for tech-enabled startups.
Yeah.
And yes, to the incentives, I do not know why any startup that is tech-enabled will not want to go for this because it is really mouth-watering. I will demarcate it into 2 bits.
Beautiful.
So there is the tax and fiscal incentives that are there, and then there's the regulatory incentives. Because if you look at over the years, one of the issues that have faced the tech startup space is the issue of regulatory bottlenecks. And this particular act has come in to form a sort of collaboration between different regulators. Reading through the act, you will see that there are about 10 or over 10 regulators that this particular council is to collaborate with to ensure speedy application process for tech startups. And then for the fiscal incentives, first of all, if there's any tech startup that falls under the pioneer status incentive industries, it will fall under that and they will benefit from the incentives that they will enjoy there. And the incentive is that for 3 to 5 years, they won't be liable to pay income tax from their business. Another incentive that we see there is capital gains tax. So for as many persons, if you dispose your assets, you're an investor and you dispose your assets, you won't be liable to pay capital gains tax as long as those particular assets has been there for the space of minimum of 24 months. And then we also saw that there's the investment tax credit. So for investors in the space who invested in it, they have this investment tax credit of about 30% of the investment that they have that they made in the particular startup in Nigeria. So this is really, really mouth-watering, both from the incentive aspect, that's the tax and fiscal incentive aspect, and from the regulatory aspect.
Interesting stuff. But you know, in all of this beautiful document, many times we have some, well, of course, shortcomings, or you'd be like, there's still some things that could be done for it to be better. Are you thinking, have you identified any form of shortcomings in this new act that maybe could have been done better?
Yes. There are some shortcomings, or should I call them gaps, right? And I'm hopeful that maybe via a regulation or guideline, these particular gaps will be filled. For example, talking about the startup labeling process, the requirements that will qualify a startup to be labeled as a startup under the Act to enjoy these incentives, they are not quite clear. And there is that issue of allowing the coordinator to have that discretion, because if you look at Section 15 of the Act, it talks about even after they've listed the requirements, that it is upon being satisfied, the coordinator being satisfied by the application of the startups, that's when they will be labeled as a startup. And that makes it not to be a bit transparent. So if I meet the requirements, I should be labeled as a startup. Why is it now being hinged on the discretion of the coordinator? So I think that's an issue that they may want to look into, so that at least let it just be that once there is the startups meet the requirements, there and then they go off and all that. And then there's the aspect of the president being the chairman of the council and the vice president being the vice chairman of the council. I think it again is something that should be looked at, because the president and the vice president, they have a whole lot of to grapple with. So making them the chairman and the vice chairman of the council, also I'm hopeful that it will not lead to slow pace of the implementation of this particular act, seeing that very soon there will be change of government.
So it's looking like this can help contribute more to maybe this contribution of the ICT space to Nigeria's GDP if properly implemented. Is that what you're thinking?
Very correct. Now let's talk about data now. McKinsey gave a report this year, and in 2021, right, Africa had an influx of $4 billion United States dollars. And out of these $4 billion United States dollars, Nigeria retained $1.4 billion United States dollars. Now, this was a period, this was for 2021, this was a time when the Startup Act, the Nigerian Startup Act, was not even there. Now, with this act coming into being, because the foreign entities, the foreign investors, one of the things they look at is the ease of doing business. And if when the ease of doing business, when the regulatory framework, legal framework was not there, Nigeria could attract 1.4 billion USD into the country. Imagine what will happen now that there is now a proper framework, legal framework. And again, this particular act now provides a guarantee for the repatriation of funds.
Wow.
So, and the issue foreign investors have been having is, how do I get back my funds? How do I take it out? But with
the airlines are there now.
You know,
we see what the central bank is trying to do.
Yes. So with this particular act now, because it's now a law, that is, because I mentioned the collaboration with regulators, right?
Yes.
There is now this collaboration with the Central Bank of Nigeria to guarantee that the investments that will come in can be easily repatriated, as long as the necessary certificates of capital importation was obtained when the funds were coming into the country.
Very interesting stuff here. But when we talk about laws that would help enable businesses and attract investment, then we should be looking at foreign direct investment, of course.
Yes, I
Yeah. So,
agree.
so what impact do you think this act would have on FDIs inflows into Nigeria?
Yes, just as I mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
So with this framework,
Yes.
this legal
And
framework,
legal and enabling
enabling
environment.
environment for them, they will be they're more comfortable bringing in funds because they now understand that it could be easily repatriated, right? On the one hand, and again, they now see that the regulators are now collaborating, and so all forms of regulatory bottlenecks
Would not be
will
there
not be
anymore.
there, and the ease of doing the business now, the ease of registration, because there's going to be collaboration with the Corporate Affairs Commission, there's going to be collaboration with the NIPC, there's going to be collaboration with the various ministries, right? Ministry of Finance, to ensure that even as these funds come in, they can be used for what the purpose they brought them in for. And then if at any point there is need for repatriation, yes, they could also repatriate. And again, talking about FDI, I mentioned about the capital gains tax, right? So the investors want to come to a place where there is tax and fiscal incentives. Now, if they are aware and they know that when they come in here and they invest, capital gains tax will not be applicable where at the point of disposal of their assets, then they could easily go and bring in the money, and then it will be attractive for this FDI.
I was thinking while you're making this submission that we also grapple with some other challenges as a country that would affect some of the implementation of things like this act. Infrastructure is there. We know what we face with finance, where young people want to start businesses and they say, wow, we cannot get money. CBN tells you money is available. But my question is, what impact will issues around infrastructure, finance, and all of that have on startups in Nigeria?
So this Nigerian Startup Act is a step in the right direction.
Wow.
However, the point needs to be made that this is not the end.
It's not yet.
It is not yet, yes. I tell you, because even though we have the tax incentives, we have the fiscal incentives, we have the regulatory bottlenecks are out of the way, the issue of infrastructure, challenge, is still there. The issue of high costs of doing business is still there. And if these are not fixed, all the expectations of the act may not really be there. So it's still a call for government to really still look at this. So regardless of this framework that has been there, there's the need, the issue of security challenge. So all these also have impacts on doing business in Nigeria generally. But what we will say is that this is a step in the right direction, but all other things that affect or that impact business, they should also be looked into.
Now, let's look at foreseeable and other, I've mentioned some actually, or challenges that you think might also affect this act. When we started with the implementation of the PIA, eventually we had to hold on for subsidy. 18 months for us to stabilize the economy and all of that. And of course, this would definitely affect implementation. So what are the other foreseeable or likely challenges that you foresee understanding this act so perfectly?
Number one is the collaboration. As I mentioned, we have about over 10 MDAs that are going to be collaborating. It is important at the point of implementation that everybody is on the same page. And so let it not be that a ministry is saying this as a Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy project. Every of these ministries must agree, must say, okay, yes, when they are receiving these requests for speedy attention to these startups, it is so I foresee that if everyone is not on the same page, the implementation of the act might not be as we have expected it. That is one big challenge I see. The second challenge I see is, of course, when do we start? The car has been put on, the ignition is on, but there is no stated timelines. How do we now kick off? There is the startup portal that is to be created. So at what point does it come in? Recall, this is just October, and we're already in the campaign season. There's about to be a change of government. Will this act that has been passed, will it be on hold until after the election? Remember again, the minister of communications and digital economy is really passionate about this. There's a likelihood that he may not remain the minister by this time next year. So these are some of the challenges that we see. When the new minister come in, when those who will be constituting this come in, would they also be passionate about driving and implementing? Because having the law is on its own is one thing. The implementation, the execution of the law is something that is also separate. And we need an executive arm of government that wants to really pursue this digital economy to implement the law. So these are the foreseeable challenges I see in the Nigerian Startup Act.
I'm looking at what's ahead for startups enjoying the benefits of this. But let's not look at, almost finally, let's look at the contribution of even the startups. They will pay taxes at the end of the day. They would also do one or two things to government. But our tax level to GDP ratio still remains very low across the world. I always like to ask when I see players like you or professionals like you from what more can we do other than, increasing tax? Some people are paying, some are not paying. So what more can be done? I like your view with regards to that.
Thank you so much, Tolu. And so this is a critical issue, right? And as you mentioned, our tax to GDP is really, really low. Even when you compare it with some other African countries, the issue is the issue of leakages. And in fact, most businesses are complaining of multiple taxation in Nigeria. The issue is, are these taxes, are they being captured formally and being recorded so that it will now help to ensure that the impact is felt on the tax to GDP ratio? It is not. If you look at the informal sector, for example, you see that they pay tax a lot, but there are a whole lot of leakages. It's not going to the right sources. It's not being recorded properly. So there's that place for the government to see how to plug these leakages. And how do we do this? That's where data comes in. That's where data comes in. It is important that the Nigerian government seek for ways of ensuring that we have the data of every person in Nigeria so that they can be able to track income of both businesses and individuals. And with that, they'll be able to, I believe with that, the contribution of Nigeria's tax to GDP will increase. So it is two things. Number one is the leakage, to plug the leakages, and number two is to ensure that we get data, and with that data, we'll be able to ensure we track taxation.
Data issues in this country. We've had BVNs, we have the NIN now, and I think all of this just needs to be synced together, and we just one channel, and my name is put up, and you can see my details.
You can say that
we
again.
should get to that point anytime soon. Why is it taking us? Why is it taking so long? Why do you think we're taking so long to get there?
I would say maybe it's the Nigerian factor, but
a lot needs to be done. A lot needs to be done, my brother. Well, let's see how all of this play out. I'm looking at, if we are to do things right, implement right, what sort of transition period are we looking at to start getting the benefits of the Startup Act?
I would say it will be after the
whole season, right?
Yes.
Then
because,
like you
we
said,
have between now and May, right? And so we may not some other things at the background in terms of setting up the portal, because the issue of cybersecurity is there. They need to get that right too, because the Startup Act talks about a particular startup portal and needs to be put in, and so many other things. So maybe in the background they'll be doing that. But in terms of now receiving applications, I want to say it may be towards at the start of the next government.
So we can start to get that. Well, it's been an interesting conversation. I will keep a tab on you with regards to this. Anytime developments come up around this bill, and of course, we would have you in to speak around it. I've been speaking to Mr. Emmanuel Akpeme. He's the lawyer and a manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. Thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. We appreciate this. Do enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much, Tolu.
All right, then.